Welcome to Sonic Discovery. I'm your host, David Correa. On this episode, we'll be covering new music from Aunt, US Girls, and a debut album from Nipsey Hussle. Hey guys, welcome to the show. If you're unfamiliar with Sonic Discovery, let me kind of just give a brief recap as to what I do here. Every Friday, there's tons of music that comes out. It's a little overwhelming to really know what's good and what's bad. So what I do is I go through the stuff I listen to. I present 3 albums to you on every episode, let you know what I think. So then you guys could either watch the video, take my advice, listen for yourself, or just completely ignore it. First up on the show, we have the 3rd album from Canadian band Aunt. This is called Room Inside the World. I was familiar with their first 2 albums, both really great albums. If you're into very visceral sounding post-punk, then I recommend you check those out. And on this one, they soften up a bit. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, because I feel like they took away some of that energy that they had on those albums, but yet they also create some of their most accessible tracks to date. Lyrically on this album, it's a little hard to digest. There's some songs where you can really tell what he's saying very clearly, and others you have to kind of decode a little bit. First, I'll be talking about the songs that I really personally enjoyed, which include the opening track, Into the Sea. Now, this is a softer post-punk track with just enough melody in it to make it a really great opener. Here he's talking about the weight of pressure really mounting up on top of him and crashing on him like a wave. These 3 Things is the first single released from the album, and this has a throbbing bass line and more of an emphasis on keyboards and synths than it would on the guitar. There is still some guitar in here, but it's very minimal. Vocally here, he reminded me a bit of Robert Smith of The Cure, as they go for a more new wave sound as they talk about questioning life. Desire is probably the most accessible song they've ever written, and it really comes into bloom in the chorus with the addition of the background vocals. I believe on this track, he's talking about him not really being fit to be in a place of peace. Brave Shield has some really beautiful, calming moments to start, and in the second half, has moments where, it kind of gets a little ugly with some dissonance. Here he talks about having protection and being able to protect others. Take Everything is one that takes some weird shifts in the music, but it's really rewarding, especially when it gets into the most intense moments. On here, they talk of breaking free. Now switching into some of the songs that I thought were just okay. Like earlier in the album, we have Disguised in America, which has a more accessible sound on the verses, but then it does this shift in the chorus, which I really didn't care for. I thought that it really lost a lot in the tonality of the music. It did bring me back on board though with this wild bridge and also the end, which I thought was very satisfying. Pieces Wasted is another track where there's a lot of shifts in the music, and sometimes it doesn't work and sometimes it does, and when it does work, it works really well. And then the closing track, Alice, has a nice gothic moment with some trippy moments thrown in towards the end. Overall, I didn't think it was the strongest release in their discography. It's a nice progression onto a more softer sound, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens with album number 4. This is going to get a score of a 6.5 out of 10 from me. So, still worth a few listens or so, but not really worth investing too much time into. Next up for review, we have the newest from US Girls. This is called In a Poem Unlimited. Now, the band is actually the recording moniker for Megan Remy. I believe she's an American, but she didn't find success until she moved up to Canada. And up there, she's released different albums under this moniker, and this happens to be her second one released through the label 4AD. Now, I didn't really know much about US Girls going into this release, but I saw this album was getting a lot of attention. I gave it a listen, and wow, I was really impressed. There's a lot of variety in the music here. Her voice, too. You know, it always keeps changing and really fits each style really well. And lyrically, you find her talking about the most interesting topics. Opening up the album, we have the track Velvet for Sale, which has some great fluidity to the music with this nice groove, twisting guitar solo, and bongos introduced into the percussion. Here, she's asking women to unite and to not allow themselves to be victims anymore. Rage of Plastic also has a really nice groove and just an overall soulful sound. There is also a really great sax solo in here that gives it almost like a jazz quality, but also kind of like a sexiness to it. Here she tells a story of a woman that is basically in poor health and infertile because of where she works and where she lives. MAH was a standout track to me, and this one stands for Mad as Hell. The music is very cheerful. It gives you more of like a disco feel, but lyrically, here she's going after President Obama and saying how, you know, when he came in, he talked about change, and he gathered a lot of people together to have hope in change, but then it ended up being a lot of the same. She also goes and attacks him on his use of drone strikes, and she calls this the coward's weapon of choice. So some harsh words for President Obama. Rosebud has a smoother R&B feel, and here we have some violins that provide little earworms that are gonna get stuck in your head. Vocally here, throughout the album, you might say that she takes different influences and she sounds like different people. On this one, to me, she sounded a bit like Madonna. On the track, she's telling her lover to not ruin a good thing because it's going to end up hurting in the end. Incidental Boogie is another highlight for me. This has a really great, harder hitting synth sound, as lyrically, she talks about a woman that has almost become comfortable with the abuse that her husband gives her. She becomes so comfortable that she's willing to deal with it as long as he's not leaving any marks and people are able to see anything at work. El Over gives us a really cool strut as she's talking about not really willing to give this relationship the time to really turn into something better. Pearly Gates was another standout track for me. This one had kind of like a hip-hop feel. It sounded to me a bit like Regulator by Warren G, and we even get a little, turntable scratches here and there. I really liked her vocal delivery on this track, and she talks about getting up to heaven and being in front of the pearly gates and not being able to get in until she gives up some sexual little pleasure. Poem is more of a synth pop sound with these really cool arpeggiated synths in it. Here she talks about how we all have the keys to living a better life, but yet, we don't really go full on for the change and choose to remain in this imperfect state. And then the closing track, Time, which is a close to 8-minute track. This one is great. It's almost instrumental in the end, where it just goes on for the last 5 minutes into a long jam with a lot of sax flourishes and some wiry guitar solos. And just, I love the music with the fluid bass and bongos. Just, they throw in a lot into this track. And this one just really poses a really simple statement of when there is nothing, there is still time. So it kind of leaves you with more of a positive outlook on things. Overall, like I mentioned, I was a big fan of this album. They throw a lot of musical genres at you, and they do them all really well. Lyrically, they take you on these little stories, really unconventional lyrics at times, but it's refreshing to see. And vocally here, again, she really shifts her voice to fit all these different styles that they do. This is going to get a score of a 9 out of 10 from me. The first 9 score of the year, so this is definitely worth checking out. And finally, closing things out, we have the debut album from Nipsey Hussle. This is called Victory Lap. Now, Nipsey is a local rapper who has released so many different mixtapes. I think the number I was looking up, I think it was like more than 10. And this happens to be his debut studio album. I'm not quite sure as to what kept him this long from releasing an album, but it was definitely worth the wait because there's a lot of quality songs on this debut. Opening up the album, we have the title track, Victory Lap, which has more of a soulful sound, and a really great feature on the hook by Stacy Barth. Here he talks about being well suited for the game because he's had a pretty rough life and a lot of material to take from. Last time that I checked, features YG and has more of a G-Funk influence to the beat. Here they're both explaining where they stand in the game. On Young N-Word, we have a feature from Puff Daddy as he talks more about his beginnings and why he's posed to be one of the best in the game. Dedication is the leading single from the album, and this features Kendrick Lamar as they're both talking about the hard work and dedication they put in to get to this point in their career. Blue Laces 2 is more of a laid-back, soulful sound as he gives us 3 different verses here that really point at 3 different moments in his life that led him here. Similar to the last one, Status Symbol 3 features Buddy, and on this beat, they're talking about riding around and, really thinking about what got them to this point. Sucker Proof, it has a really interesting beat on here rhythmically, as the beat also kind of sounds like you could hear some sirens in it. Here he's going after those that are really claiming to be something that they're not. Grinding All My Life gives us some really catchy production as he's talking about the hustling that he's had to do to get to where he's at. Million While You're Young, featuring The Dream, also gives us more of a laid-back sound as he's talking about him being able to find success on his own merits. And on Loaded Bases, we get a great feature from CeeLo as we get another soulful track as they're talking about just being grateful to make it alive to the next day. After that, we have countless other songs that weren't as strong as the ones I just talked about, but definitely still worth a listen. We have Hustle and Motivate, Keys to the City, Real Big, and even the bonus tracks on here, Double Up and Right Hand to God, were all pretty good. There wasn't a dud on this album. Overall, I was really impressed for a debut album from Nipsey. I mean, with all the mixtapes that he's released, he's definitely honed his craft, and I see, big things from this guy. So if you're not familiar with him now, I'm sure you're going to hear from him pretty soon. This is going to get a score of an 8 out of 10 from me. So, worth checking out. Well, there you have it. Aunt, probably worth a listen or two, but US Girls and Nipsey Hussle, definitely worth repeat listens. If you guys like the reviews, make sure to hit the like button at the bottom. And also, I'm always welcome to any recommendations you may have for me. And if you like the whole episode and the whole series, go ahead and hit subscribe so you know when the next one comes out.